Wyoming Territory, 1879. The wind howled like a warning across the high plains, dust curling up from the dry ground as the sun dropped toward the horizon. Inside the weathered walls of the Dry Creek trading post, Sabella Deering stood behind the counter, arms folded tight across her chest, trying to hold herself together. She had not walked into this place by choice. 3 weeks ago, her uncle, if he still deserved the name, had driven his freight wagon out of Dry Creek, leaving her with an unpaid ledger and a single bag of belongings. He had promised they would be heading west together to start over. Instead, he had handed her over to the storekeeper to settle his gambling debt. "You work here until the debt's cleared, girl," the owner, Mr. Tate, had said with a shrug, already counting the coins her uncle had lost. $2 a week, and you owe me 23. Sabella had counted the math in her head more times than she could stand. That meant nearly 3 months of sweeping, sorting, and sleeping in the corner behind the sacks of flour. No windows back there, just cold nights and the smell of dried beans. She was 21, no family left, no way out, until that morning. The bell over the trading post door had rung sharp and clear. A tall man stepped in, dust on his boots, sun on his broad shoulders. His hat was pulled low, but his gaze swept the room once with quiet focus before it landed on her. He walked like he belonged wherever he was, but he moved slow, like he respected the space he entered. He made his way to the counter and tipped his hat. "I'm looking for some saddle soap," he said, voice low and steady. Sabella pushed a tin toward him without a word. Her heart was thudding like it always did when strangers came in, but something about the way he looked at her, calm, not poking, not pitying, made her pause. "Tate gone?" he asked, glancing toward the back. "He is out to the barn," she said, voice clipped. "He'll be back." The man nodded, then looked at her again. Really looked. "You here alone?" he asked. She hesitated. "I work here." That was not the question. Her jaw tensed. "I do not owe you my story." He nodded once, accepting that. He set a silver dollar on the counter. "For the soap." She picked it up, glanced at the coin, then set it in the till. He turned and headed for the door, but paused. Looked back. "You got a name?" She hesitated again. Something in her chest twisted. "Sabella. I'm Ransom Ellery," he said. "Pleasure meeting you, Sabella." The bell rang as he left. She watched him through the front window, his horse tied near the post rail. He mounted, then turned once in the saddle to glance back toward the store. Then he rode off slow toward the ridge. That night, she lay awake on her bedroll behind the flour sacks, staring at the dark ceiling. She did not know what to make of him. Nobody in Dry Creek asked her name. Nobody looked twice. The next day, he came back. And the next. Each time, he bought something small: coffee beans, a tin cup, a length of rope, but always spoke to her like she was not invisible. On the 5th day, he came in with a rolled paper in hand. He set it on the counter and pushed it toward her. She blinked. "What is this?" "Marriage license," he said. "Signed on my end. Just needs yours." Her breath caught in her chest. "What?" "You were left here like property," he said. "That is not right. But I talked to Tate. He said he will release the debt if you are claimed as a bride. Paperwork is legal. Clean. You would be free. I do not know you. I do not expect you to love me today," he said. "But I would give you a roof, place to sleep. No more debts. No more back rooms." She stared down at the paper. Her hands trembled. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "Because I would not leave a woman behind like that," he said. "And because I think you deserve better than this place." She looked at him hard. He did not flinch. "Do you have land?" "South of here, near the Laramie River. Small cabin. Horses. Chickens. Nothing fancy." Sabella pressed her lips together. "And if I say no?" "I ride out," he said simply. "But I hope you do not." Her eyes burned. No one had ever offered her a real choice before. "I need one night," she whispered. He nodded. "I will come back at dawn." That night, she sat on the stoop of the trading post, knees pulled to her chest, watching the stars. She thought of her mother, gone 5 winters now. She thought of the way Ransom had looked at her like she was not broken, like she was worth the trouble. And when dawn came and he stood at the door again, holding out the paper with steady hands, she signed it. They rode out that morning with her bag tied behind his saddle and the wind in her hair. She had never sat a horse behind a man before, never leaned into someone's back like that, holding on as the land rolled out before them. He did not talk much, but when he did, it mattered. By nightfall, they reached his land. The cabin stood solid against the trees, smoke rising from the chimney. A dog barked once and wagged its tail as they approached. "I built it myself," Ransom said, dismounting and helping her down. She looked at the little house, the fence, the wooden swing hanging from the porch beam. She could not speak. Inside it was warm, clean. A fire crackled. There was a cot made up with fresh linens beside the hearth. "This is yours," he said, setting her bag on the bed. "You will have your own space. We will do this right." She turned to him. "Why are you being so kind?" He looked at her, quiet. "Because I see something good in you," he said, "and I want to give it a place to grow." Sabella's chest tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like that. She nodded once, then sat on the bed and pulled her boots off slowly. Ransom turned and busied himself by the fire, giving her time. That night she slept under a real roof. No flour sacks, no cold floor, and for the first time in a long while, she did not feel like someone left behind. The first morning came crisp and pale, with frost clinging to the grass and the cabin's windows glazed in white breath. Sabella rose before the sun touched the ridge, drawn by the scent of coffee and the soft scrape of boots on the porch. Ransom stood by the woodpile, splitting kindling with slow, practiced strikes. He worked without urgency, his coat hanging open, breath visible each time he exhaled. She watched from the threshold, arms wrapped around herself, unsure if she should speak. He didn't look up. "There's a kettle on the stove," he said. "Should still be warm." She stepped back inside. The cabin was quiet, save for the ticking of the mantel clock and the occasional crack from the fire. She poured a tin cup full, her hands warming around it as she settled on the bench near the hearth. When he came back in, brushing snow from his sleeves, she looked up. "Are you always up before the sun?" she asked. "Most days," he said, setting the kindling near the stove. "Mornings are honest. Nothing's got a hold of the day yet." She nodded, not sure what to say to that. Her days had never felt like they belonged to her at all. He didn't press her to fill the silence, just reached for a pan and cracked eggs into it with one hand, the other steadying the skillet above the flame. She watched him cook, movements unhurried but sure. "I can help," she said after a while. "You will," he said, "but not today." She frowned. "Why not today?" "Because you've carried enough weight lately. Today is for catching your breath." She looked at him, surprised by the ease in his voice. "You aren't worried I'll just sit around and do nothing?" "You don't strike me as the kind who could," he said simply. She didn't answer. She didn't know how. After breakfast, he showed her the property not with words, but by walking it beside her. He handed her an extra coat, heavier than hers, and let her match his stride. Past the chicken coop, through the cottonwoods near the creek, along the fence he'd built the previous spring. When they reached the far edge where the land dipped toward a frozen pond, he stopped and pointed toward a rough shed. "Used to keep pigs there," he said. "Don't know more. Been thinking of tearing it down." Sabella studied it, the sagging roof, the half-buried trough. "Could be something else," she said. He looked at her. "Like what?" "Smokehouse, maybe," she said. "Or a place to hang herbs." "If you had someone to dry them." His brow lifted just a little. "You know plants." "My mother did," she said. "I watched." "You remember what you saw?" She nodded. He turned back toward the shed. "Then maybe we won't tear it down." She felt something settle in her chest. Not ease, exactly, but the start of it. That afternoon, she took a broom to the corners of the cabin and found a stack of mended linens in a cedar chest by the window. She folded them again just to give her hands something to do. Ransom was outside with the horses, and the stillness of the house made her thoughts louder than she liked. She found herself glancing at the door more than once, half waiting for it to swing open, for someone to come and tell her it had all been a mistake. That she didn't belong here. That she couldn't stay. But no one came. When he returned, dusk was closing in. He smelled of leather and hay, and his gloves were stiff with cold. "You hungry?" he asked. "I can cook," she offered. "If you'll let me." He nodded and stepped aside. Sabella worked quietly, setting a pot to simmer with salt pork and onions and dried beans she'd found in the pantry. The space felt different with her moving through it, not like it was hers yet, but like it might be. Ransom watched her from the chair by the fire, one hand resting on the armrest, the other still holding his gloves. "You're not what I expected," he said. She stirred the pot, not looking up. "What did you expect? Someone angry, or afraid, or ready to run?" "I don't have anywhere left to run," she said. "That's not the same as wanting to stay." She turned, met his eyes. "I don't know what I want yet." He held her gaze. "That's fair." They ate in quiet, bowls balanced on their knees, spoons scraping soft against tin. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, but inside, the fire held steady. Later, she stood at the window, watching snow fall in thin threads across the yard. Ransom came up beside her, his presence solid and warm. "I can put a second lock on your door tonight," he said. She looked at him. "I don't need it." He didn't argue. She turned back to the glass. "I don't know how to be a wife." "I don't need you to be one," he said. "Not in the way folks talk about. I just want you to be yourself. That's all I'm asking." She didn't answer, but her shoulders eased. That night, she lay beneath a quilt she hadn't sewn, in a bed she had not earned, in a house that had opened its door without asking her to pay for her place in it. And for the first time in her memory, she felt no shame in being still. The snow deepened in the days that followed, laying heavy over the roof and bending the fence rails under its weight. Sabella had never lived anywhere long enough to see a season pass, but now the land seemed to shift around her slowly, like it was settling into itself and asking her to do the same. Ransom returned from the barn one morning with a scuff of mud frozen to his boots and a quiet look about him. She was at the table, sorting through a box of dried stalks and brittle roots she'd tucked into the corner of the cabin, trying to recall what each one had been used for. He glanced at the pile, then pulled off his hat. "There's a wagon out near the creek," he said. "One wheel busted. Looks like they got caught in the wind last night." She stood. "Anyone with it?" "A woman and a boy," he said. "No blood, but they're cold. I brought them in." Her eyes widened. "You brought them here?" "They're outside now. I didn't want to startle you." She crossed the floor and stepped out onto the porch. A woman sat on the bench, wrapped in a worn shawl, a boy curled beside her with his face hidden against her side. The woman's cheeks were raw from the cold, but her eyes were sharp. Watchful. "I'm Sabella," she said gently. "Come in. We've got heat." The woman hesitated, then nodded once and rose. Ransom opened the door wider as they entered, guiding them toward the hearth without a word. The boy didn't speak, just clutched his mother's sleeve and stared at the fire like he didn't trust it to stay lit. Sabella fetched the last clean quilt from the cedar chest and draped it over their shoulders, then ladled warm broth into 2 tin bowls. The woman's voice cracked as she spoke. "We were headed to Rollins. My husband died last spring. My brother wired for us, said he had work waiting." "You're far off the road," Ransom said. "We tried a shortcut. Shouldn't have." The fire snapped and the boy flinched. Sabella knelt beside him, offering the bowl. He took it without looking up. "They can sleep in the loft," she said. "It's warmer than the shed and there's space." Ransom gave a quiet nod. After they were settled upstairs, Sabella returned to the table, her hands restless on the wood. Ransom poured water into the basin and rinsed the mud off his boots in silence. "They'll only stay the night," he said. "I know." He looked over at her. "You all right with it?" She nodded. "I've been taken in before. Feels right to offer it back." He dried his hands on a cloth. "You're not like most people." I don't know what most people are anymore. That evening, while the wind battered the shutters and the fire burned low, Ransom brought in a bundle of thin cedar branches and laid them near the hearth. Sabella was sewing a patch onto one of her sleeves, her needle steady, her shoulders relaxed in a way he hadn't seen that first day. "Do you ever regret staying here?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Do you regret bringing me?" "No," she set the needle down. "Then I don't either." He watched her turn the fabric in her hands, inspecting her stitches. "I'm not used to anything lasting," she said. "But I keep waking up and finding this place still here. That means something." He crouched by the fire, feeding it a branch at a time. "It means you're part of it now." They didn't speak for a while. Later, after the loft was quiet and the lantern burned low, she stood at the window again, but this time she wasn't watching for something beyond the trees. She was listening to the quiet inside the house. Ransom came to stand beside her, his hand brushing hers where it rested on the windowsill. "I patched your coat," she said. The seam under the arm was starting to pull. He didn't answer right away. "Then you didn't have to." "I know. But I wanted to." He turned toward her, and for the first time she didn't look away. "You've done more for me than I knew how to ask for," she said. "You didn't have to ask." She stepped closer, her voice lower. "I'm not afraid of you anymore. You never needed to be. I know that now." The fire cracked behind them, but neither moved. The silence stretched, not empty but full of something new. "I'm not ready for everything," she said. "But I'm not running." His voice was quiet. "Then we'll take our time." She leaned into him, resting her forehead against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, slow and certain, like the land folding in around the cabin for winter. And in that stillness, Sabella knew she wasn't just passing through anymore. She was home. The wind settled for a few days, and the snow held, thick and undisturbed across the fields. Ransom rode out early to check the line fence where the drifts piled highest, leaving Sabella with the woman and her son still quiet in the loft. She boiled water for washing and scrubbed the floorboards near the hearth, her fingers raw and red by the time the sun cut through the frost on the windows. By mid-morning, the woman stepped down the loft ladder, her shawl pulled tight, the boy trailing behind her. "He needs to move," she said, voice rough but steadier than it had been. "There's a stool and some whittling knives in the shed. He could sit by the window," Sabella said, keeping her tone even. The woman studied her. "You always this calm?" "No," Sabella said. "Just learning when it matters." The boy took the knife without a word, settling by the window with a block of pine and careful fingers. His mother sat stiff-backed on the bench, eyes flicking around the room like she was counting the exits. Sabella poured tea into a tin mug and slid it across the table. "What's your name?" "Ellen," the woman said. "My boy's Jacob." Sabella nodded once. "I'm not here to ask where you came from. Just wanted to know what to call you." Ellen sipped, then set the mug down. "You live here with him? Alone?" "Yes." "And you trust him?" Sabella met her eyes. "Yes." Ellen looked away, her mouth tight. Sabella didn't press her. Instead, she took down the basket of dried plant bundles she'd begun sorting. She laid them across the table and began tying them in cleaner bunches with twine. Ellen's gaze lingered. "My mother used to hang sprigs over our door in spring. Said it kept bad spirits out." "Mine said it kept flies down," Sabella said. They didn't smile, but something eased between them. When Ransom returned just after midday, snow melting on his shoulders, Jacob startled upright from his perch, carving still in hand. Ransom crouched beside the boy, eyeing the half-formed shape of a bird in the wood. "You do that yourself?" Jacob nodded without speaking. "Well done," Ransom said. "Birds like that belong on a shelf, not in a fire." The boy's face didn't change, but he held the carving a little steadier. That night, after the dishes were dried and the loft went quiet again, Ransom sat near the stove, oiling the worn leather of his saddlebags. Sabella sat across from him, mending the hem of a blanket that had torn at the edges. "She's not ready to move on," Sabella said. "No," he agreed. "But I think she wants to. She watches everything. Like she's waiting for someone to come through that door." "Might be," he said. "Could be she's run from more than bad luck." Sabella set the needle down. You'd let them stay longer? If they need it, he answered. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. You've got more patience than most men. I've had enough years to learn what rushing costs. She watched the oil soak into the leather beneath his hand. You said before you built this cabin yourself. Was there ever someone else here? No, he said. Built it for what I thought might come. Then figured it'd stay empty. She didn't speak for a long moment. The only sound was the steady scrape of cloth across leather. I've never had anything that waited for me, she said. Not a place. Not a person. You do now. She looked at him. Why me? He didn't look up. You were left. But you didn't fold. You stayed standing. Sabella swallowed. I didn't feel steady. Doesn't matter how it felt. You were. She rose, moved to the window, and stood there with her arms folded. Outside, the moon laid silver light over the snow, softening everything it touched. I want to make a life here, she said quietly. You already are. She turned, her voice lower. I mean with you. Not just under the same roof. His hands stilled. You sure? I wouldn't say it if I wasn't. He stood, crossed the space between them, and stopped just close enough for her to feel the warmth off his coat. I never asked you for anything you weren't ready to give. I know, she said. That's why I can give it now. His hand reached for hers, fingers rough with work, but gentle as they closed around hers. You said we'd take our time. I want that. I want to learn what it means, not just say the words. He nodded. Then we'll learn it together. She stepped into him, resting her head against his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. And in the quiet, nothing needed explaining. The fire burned low behind them, and the wind outside passed harmless over the eaves. In the loft above, Jacob stirred once in sleep, and Ellen shifted, but the cabin held. Sabella closed her eyes, listening to the stillness between the walls. For the first time, it wasn't just peace she felt, it was belonging. The thaw came slow and steady, like the land was taking its time to stretch after a long sleep. By late March, the snow had begun to pull back in patches, revealing the soft earth beneath, dark, wet, smelling of life. A few early shoots pushed up near the chicken run, pale and hesitant, but living things all the same. Ellen and Jacob left the cabin just after the last freeze. Ransom hitched the team to the repaired wagon himself, and Sabella packed a cloth sack with bread, dried apples, and the last of the smoked venison. Ellen didn't speak much, but when she climbed into the driver's seat, she reached down and took Sabella's hand with both of hers. No words, just a firm hold and a look that said more than anything spoken could have. Jacob waved once, quiet as ever, but he tucked the carved bird he'd made into Sabella's apron pocket when he thought she wasn't looking. She kept it. After they were gone, the house felt larger, not empty, but returned to its rhythm. Sabella moved through it with a different certainty now, no longer measuring each motion for permission. She hung her herbs high, organized the pantry in ways that made sense to her hands, and stitched a new curtain for the west window in soft blue calico she'd found folded in the back of the cedar chest. One evening, while Ransom was tending the forge he'd built near the barn, Sabella walked the property line alone. The creek ran faster now, swollen with meltwater, and the cottonwoods along its bank had started to bud. She knelt near the edge, scooped a handful of water to her lips, and let the chill of it settle through her. When she returned to the cabin, Ransom was seated on the porch rail, elbows on his knees, watching the line of trees beyond the field. She climbed the steps and stood beside him without speaking. He nodded toward the horizon. You see that? She followed his gaze. A small cluster of elk had come down from the higher ridges, grazing near the tree line. Their coats were still winter thick, but their movement was easy, unhurried. They know the hard part's past, he said. Sabella eased down beside him. So do I. He didn't answer, but he reached over and took her hand, warm and strong around hers. She let her head rest against his shoulder. That night, after the lamps were blown out and the fire died down to coals, she lay beside him in the quiet, their breaths falling into a shared rhythm. Tell me something you never told anyone, she whispered. He was silent for a while. Then, I used to think love was for other folks, that I was built for solitude. You're not. No, he said. Not anymore. She turned into him, her hand resting over his heart. You made room for me when you didn't have to. I didn't make room, he said. I was waiting without knowing it. The next weeks passed with the slow steadiness of early spring. They worked side by side, mending fence rails, planting seed, repairing the roof where the snow had warped the shingles. Sabella took to keeping a small journal of what she planted and when, sketching the leaves and notating the soil. Ransom carved her a wooden box to keep her herbs and tools in. He never asked what she wrote, but sometimes she caught him tracing the edges of the box with his thumb, like he liked knowing it was there. One afternoon, as a warm wind blew in from the south and the hens scratched farther from the coop than they had in months, Ransom took her hand and led her down to the creek. There's something I've been meaning to show you, he said. They crossed the field, boots soft in the grass. At a bend in the creek where the water slowed and pooled wide, he led her to a flat patch of earth just beyond the cottonwoods. I was saving this spot, he said, for when I found someone worth building beside. Sabella looked around. The ground was clear, the trees spaced just right for shade come summer, and the water close enough to hear. You mean to build another house? She asked. He shook his head. A second room. A space that's ours. Made by both our hands. She smiled, slow and sure. I'd like that. They cleared the land together. Not all in one day, but over time, each board and nail placed with care. It wasn't large, but it was theirs. She carved a small wooden shelf to hold the carved bird Jacob had given her. Ransom placed a tin of her dried herbs beside the stove, always within reach. The days grew longer, the nights warmer. One morning, Sabella stood in the doorway and watched the sun rise over the ridge, her hand resting over the swell beneath her apron, the smallest curve but unmistakable now. She didn't speak when Ransom came up behind her, just leaned into him and he wrapped his arms around her like he already knew. You sure? He asked, his voice low against her ear. She nodded against his chest. Yes. He turned her toward him, hands resting gentle on her waist. Then we'll build for 3. That summer, the garden came up strong. The beans climbed high, the squash took root, and the bees returned to the clover near the barn. Sabella sang sometimes while she worked, not loud, just under her breath, old tunes her mother used to hum. Ransom listened from the porch, his hands idle, heart full. When the baby came, it was late September. The wind had turned again, this time fragrant with fallen leaves and wood smoke. Ransom stayed by her side, his hand never leaving hers, his eyes steady. And when the child cried out a girl, strong-lunged and warm-skinned, Sabella wept with joy, her forehead pressed to Ransom's, their daughter between them. They named her Unia after Sabella's grandmother, who'd once crossed the Missouri River with nothing but a wedding ring and a tin of dried sage. Years passed, but the rhythm held. The cabin grew inch by inch. Sabella taught Unia to recognize plants by their smell, their stem, their ways of curling towards sun or shade. Ransom taught her to ride, to mend a stirrup without fuss, to watch the clouds for weather before it came. One autumn evening, with the wind just cool enough to carry the edge of winter, Sabella and Ransom walked the field together, Unia running ahead with her braids swinging down her back. The house behind them stood strong, smoke curling from the chimney, the porch swing creaking in the breeze. Sabella looked over at Ransom, his face lined now, but his eyes still steady. Did you ever think we'd have all this? He shook his head, smiling soft. Didn't know how to dream that wide. She took his hand, laced their fingers. We built it anyway. And they stood there, side by side, watching their daughter chase the wind through the tall grass, 2 people who had once been left behind, now rooted deep in a life made with care, a love earned through quiet hours and days stitched together with trust. They had nothing left to prove. They had everything they needed.